multi-stakeholder efforts we've ever been involved with H-GAC. Citizens, environmental groups, regulatory agencies, developers, attorneys, etc., who are all talking about what would be an implementation plan for urban Houston's bacteria-impaired waterways that we can all live with. And that is really just, that group is just getting off the ground right now. But they meet, Carl, on the 16th, and their general meeting schedule is
right now we're meeting
the third Tuesday of the month. Check our website for the big. We usually have a large public turnout there, and if you're interested in these water issues, that's a place where you can hear it all debated. And then really, kind of in the background, but really in the foreground of all this, is our Clean Rivers program. Clean Rivers legislation basically forbids us from getting involved in implementation projects, but this is the program that provides all the data that feeds all the other ones. We actually coordinate right now with 6 different agencies in Metro Houston, so we're all monitoring data according to the same parameters. All that data is available on our website, and in addition to being this sort of omnibus data clearinghouse, we do special studies on, for example, one we did a few years ago was looking at a developing area in Montgomery County, looking at what were the contributions of pollution as that area grew, so we could have factors using future models. We also have a couple of very successful public engagement programs. We annually co-sponsor the River Lakes Basin Bayous Trash Bash, which some of you may have participated in. And we have a citizens monitoring program, the Texas Green Team program. We have some some brochures that we can share with you. We would love to sign up 10 volunteers by the end of the meeting today, and you can get trained up and contribute your own sampling to our data network. Just going to close on, imagine what if instead of, for example, downtown, having the parking garages up against the bayou, what if we got our water clean enough that would really be the focal point of development, a place people would want to actually sit by and eat on a nice day, as well as maintaining this, again, this close to this big a city, phenomenal natural resources, places for reflection and observation of our winged and four-legged and finned friends. And let's dream big. Look at this website if you're interested in getting more info on all the water programs, and I'd be happy to take any questions. How much time do we have?
So 1:30.
Okay.
You also have, maybe it's a personal dream that you don't want to talk about.
Uh-oh.
The Galveston today, we bring, why not mention that? What is that?
Well, see, I just, no, I don't have a slide of it. I just, I guess I dreamed too much. What was the statement about a vision without a implementation is a hallucination?
Did you never hear the other part? Implementation without a vision is what?
Is what?
Is what?
I think it's kind of running on a treadmill. The slide we used to show some was, I showed a picture of the Chicago lakefront, which is interesting historically. I was reading, I think the book is called City of the Century, and there was a very interesting story that when that land was all dedicated for parkway, that was a very contentious issue, and there were lots of industrial and development concerns that this was prime industrial and maritime property, and that's not in the public's interest. And I think as recently as the 40s or so, there were still people trying to get access to some of that land. And interestingly, almost all the shipping and steel industry is gone from Chicago now. That's a white-collar city. And that parkland is, I don't think anybody would seriously entertain notions today of converting some of that to industrial use. Well, we were just wondering if you took that kind of approach to Galveston Bay, and what if that were ringed by, let's say, a 5-mile or 2-mile buffer, 100 miles around the shore, Galveston Bay World Park. And the thought is, well, good Lord, you've got Texas City and the ship channel there, and that stuff's never going to go anywhere, right? Just like those steel mills in Calumet City and in South Chicago, they were never going to go anywhere, right? That's forever, isn't it? It's time now, if we want that to happen in 100 years, to start thinking and talking about it. But I would suggest to you that we talk about things that are going to put us on the map, you know, Wortham Center, Katy Freeway, New Airport Runway. The Galveston Bay World Park like that would put us on the map. And by the way, it would also, I think, provide a lot of storm surge and other ecological services, storm surge protection, I mean. And maybe an idea to start thinking about, if not quite that big, then maybe some segments of it.
Can I ask if this comment, I guess, when you talk about existing suburban areas and developing suburban areas, and what we can possibly do there, there's not any sort of nod to the notion of those areas becoming gaining. I would say suburban with the hyphen suburban, which means not necessarily distance, but about the characteristics of the place, having their own centers and having their own mixed use and having at some point multi-family stuff for seniors and so on in those subdivisions. So the retrofit of the existing and growing subdivisions strikes me as everybody who might be added to that new mix is not on the prairie center.
Right.
So if you add that, as I don't know what the term would be, but retrofit for mixed use or something.
Well, I think part of that was what you saw when we remodeled the Cypress Creek watershed blocking the west side, is some of that growth found itself, you know, that maybe as you drive out in the 290 corridor and you see those forlorn parcels that weren't big enough, you know, for the typical template. Well, maybe we get, you know, nice mixed use housing and neighborhood retail pod on one of those sites. And I'm anticipating where you're going with the other part. I think we will reclaim some of those suburban developments eventually back to their ecological services, just as if the demographic and market shifts are indeed as profound as some say. I think we're probably well oversupplied in a lot of that kind of housing stock. You know, another factor, another way that's happening right now is with this repetitive flood loss buyouts program. Cities are looking at houses where they've had to pay multiple claims, and you go down to a place like Friendswood, they've got little pocket parks now that there used to be houses that kept flooding. So I think what we're interested in is, yes, we've got this panoply of different things we can do. How can we put that, though, in some sort of a framework and a structure so we're not all over the place on it?
When you were mentioning that one of the most promising tools or strategies was conservation in the outlying areas, I mean, having worked as a political journalist in Oregon, the first thing that occurs to me is the urban growth boundaries that they have there. And they're essentially rings around the urban areas, outside of which it is almost impossible to develop. And I wonder what kinds of policy tools you might be thinking about to implement conservation in our outlying areas, given that the culture here, when it comes to land, I mean, we don't have beautiful mountains, and people think of land very differently here. What kinds of, you know, Houston doable policy tools might we have to conserve our outlying areas?
Ooh,
other than saying...
No, I'm just kidding. Well, let me not answer your question first by saying this. I'm very skeptical of the word never. I'm skeptical of the concept that, you know, there are things that Texans won't do that Oregonians will do. And I've used this line at another conference, but you guys will forgive me. We had a staffer who came down here from another part of the country about 20 years ago who was explaining to me that Starbucks was never going to work in Houston. It just wouldn't. So I think when we get up to being around 9 million people, public attitudes, which is what our forecast will put us at, public attitudes are going to start to change about land and whether or not we ought to have access to, even if it's flat, any sort of greened and treed space. So I think over time, we might be surprised at the kind of tools that are there. I think in the short term, you're right though, urban growth boundary is something that always gets thrown out kind of as the specter of, you know, if we start talking about planning, next thing you know, they're going to be putting urban growth boundaries up and raising housing prices. I like the idea of our fanciful green impact fee. Make it a market approach. We're not going to prohibit somebody from developing, but right now, you've got a great mechanism. I mean, municipal utility district, it's a great land conversion tool, and developers love it. And so we've essentially very effectively subsidized that conversion of land, whereas if you want to build in the city, you've got all these rules, and you've got to repay for your own pipes to fix, and so we're putting a lot of burden on it then. If we could affect, you know, that market dynamic and use it, I think that would be the way to go. The other thing I think, though, is just the power of the idea. I look at what flood control is doing now versus 20 years ago. Once they got a different paradigm, you know, and I think working with some of the rural counties and drainage districts in these outlying areas, we could have similar results.
I want to add something to that, because to me, the first conservation tool is just simply don't build on something. Well, what does that mean? Well, that means don't use tax money to put roads into it. So, Grand Parkway, Prairie Parkway will cost tens, hundreds of thousands of acres of land to be lost to development, not just in the road strip. So, when we say Harris County Commissioners vote to put the Grand Parkway segment E through the Katy Prairie, they are also saying we vote to get rid of all the green space in the Katy Prairie. They would never actually vote that, but that is the effect. So for citizens to just kind of become much better watchdogs of where these commissioners and so forth want to put roads for development, where there's really no transportation value to those roads until that development happens, could be huge. And I know most of the conservation groups shy away from that. They can't really say that because they have so many prominent citizens on their board, so they can't say, listen, don't build roads, but other people can say that.
You know, another thing is the idea that culture in Texas won't accept that, the idea of limiting growth on the periphery. I mean, in College Station, they're in the middle of implementing a limit to only one house or one structure per 25 acres if you're outside the incorporated limits of the city. And that's not a different culture from Houston. I mean, that's not, people say, well, you know, that works in California, that works in Oregon, that works in Austin, but if it works in College Station, it would work in Houston.
Sorry, by the way, you know, the attitudes of the citizens of Houston and Harris County are already totally with you. I mean, we're talking about very, very large numbers. It's a schism between elected officials and what people want. They're totally disagreeing that we should develop all the floodplain, whereas the city of Houston, for instance, wants to develop all the floodplain. So I don't know how we get past that, but those attitudes are already where you would hope they would be. And big time, 80%. Both Kleinberg and Blue Print Houston.
In Fort Bend County, Sugarland area, the culture seems to be that they want to build anything and everything that's going to give them more tax base right now. They're having trouble paying for the police. They're having lots of problems over there because they don't have a lot of industries, particularly not a lot of tax base. Now, if you start talking about talking about restricting their tax base, of course, this is a county by county thing in H-GAC. you're probably gonna have a little bit of flack there. I was also wondering about the so-called rising of the sea level, which you hear a lot about global warming, what all you wanna talk about. It's supposed to be 8 to 10 feet in Galveston area. I've heard numbers like that. What will that do to all of these plans?
Well, I'll address both those issues. First of all, on Fort Bend, actually, I totally agree with you, they're interested in tax base. Fort Bend is not a particularly sprawling development form, though, and look at our forecast. Here's Fort Bend, Richard Rosenberg, compared to Montgomery, for example, where we're showing almost the entire county developed. I guess we're showing most of Fort Bend too, but it's not quite as dramatic to me because Fort Bend, more of that housing demand is being sucked up into the master plan communities there. Whereas in Montgomery County in the Northwest, we have a lot more kind of patchwork development. So if we wanted to integrate some of these conservation design, low impact development principles, I think we might have a better shot at it in Fort Bend than we're having right now in some of these other places. As to sea level rise, we modeled, I don't have the graphic with me, but we modeled 2 feet, which I think was what we took as the median IPCC for 2100. So we wanted just a conservative number. It doesn't do much. There's some areas in NASA, Clear Lake, but even though it seems flat here, we actually have this little, I don't know if that's an escarpment or whatnot, but we're not nearly as susceptible in our high-value urban development as, say, Miami is to a sea level rise scenario.
Sorry, just this tax-based thing though. Taxes that increase because of suburban development require, generally speaking, more expenses for services than you bring in. So it's totally shooting yourself in the foot if you're on to increase your tax base through suburban development. Commercial development, agriculture, both send money back.
But
So,
on a pricey, if they can get you into the pricey development, you still got the same number of people in the structure, maybe less per square, whatever. So they like those real expensive homes, and businesses, you're right, businesses pay their own way. They pay their own garbage and so forth and so on.
You know,
And their own security. But in Sugarland area, in that Sugar Creek area, they like big homes, 400,000 or something like that, because then that does give them good tax base. And so they're trying to be clever about that over there. And
I think we could debate that issue. That'd be an interesting presentation. The point of yours, what I was going to make is it's hard to, at a county-wide level, sustain. I mean, there's some high-end subdivisions, but kind of looking county-wide services, there's not a market for that much high-value growth they're having. But the point I want to end with on your comment is you're absolutely right. If any of this is perceived as, well, Harris County is the only place that's going to be allowed to grow anymore, we're going to have trouble getting consensus on that. So I don't know what the mechanism is, but there's got to be something in it for everybody else. Now there's things places do in other parts of the country and world with revenue sharing and whatnot. Maybe there would be a way that we could even shoulder the load that some of those counties are feeling they need to get their tax base up for through other mechanisms. If Harris County residents enjoy those ecological services, I don't know, maybe there's a conservation fee that Harris County residents would pay. I don't know. Those things sound a little bit far-fetched right now, but if those survey results are true, something was structured right. Well, I'm not denying the truth. If sometimes a survey versus somebody's enthusiasm about voting for a candidate who says he's going to raise fees are a little bit different.
how many towns and cities did you say we have in the 8 county region? Townsend City.
The 8 county, I'm not sure, Dimitri, do you know?
What,
I think we've got 132 in our 13 counties.
So, well, the point is that all of those could grow in each county,
Right.
as opposed to the unincorporated areas,
Right.
problem solved.
But the problem, if we were going to look at one thing, I'd say look at municipal utility district establishment. If you, as in other places, and many people have a lot of arguments why this would be a bad idea, but in other places you have to wait usually for the city to extend sewer service before you can put in a subdivision of any scope. Here you go.
I know this is about water quality, but can you kind of overlay the water quantity issues and concerns? For instance, I was over at Rosenberg City Council the other night, and they were talking about how they were going to build some pretty significant pipelines from their water treatment plant over to another place and completely bypass putting it back into the water body because the water body is already overcommitted for the water that gets taken out, and they're afraid that they're going to wind up having to pay then to take the water that they treated back out further downstream. I guess the Brazos River is another example of that, where Dow Chemical and I don't know, several other big industrial users basically own all of the water already. And so how does that help us, maybe, possibly, in terms of shaping where growth goes, and how does it fit into this?
I'm looking at somebody saying. This is Carl Masterson, who's our Environmental Resources Program Manager, who follows the water supply side closer than I do.
Yeah, there are lots of things about water supply. There is a water body in the state that hasn't been oversold as far as the water rights to take water out of. There are.
How can we grow that much then, if that's the case? I mean, how is this going to work?
Well, the people who are doing the water planning, the state's broken up into a number of different regions. And actually, if anybody's interested, our Natural Resources Advisory Committee meets on February 5th at 1:30 in room A, and we're having representatives of 3 of those planning areas come talk exactly about what's going on as far as planning for water demand and shortages. Right now, we're not in too much of a problem, but it's going to get more complicated because of groundwater. There really is no way to regulate groundwater, and all the groundwater conservation districts that are being formed. Nobody wants to give up their water. And it may be at some point where you identify those areas that are going to have, that water supply. That's we're going to have to look. You might think about limiting the road to. But there are also plans to bring water over from the Speed, from the bed, for enriching water. It's a matter of getting it from there to here, and getting through all the environmental issues and cost of bringing it over. Plus the fact that people there don't really want to give it to Houston. That's a big problem. And with Dallas-Fort Worth area, that Trinity River, more and more you're finding people that are taking their wastewater treatment effluent and reusing that. And the more you do that, the less water comes into the stream, the less it comes down here. So it's really, I always hate to use this, but it's really a pretty complicated problem. And people are trying to, and right now we also have great concern over the environmental flows. How much water do you require people to leave so that the bays and estuaries get enough fresh water? And because that turns over, then you'll have whole different species of fish and animals that will be able to survive. So there is the legislature created an environmental flows committee, now there's another whole, round of looking at what's necessary.
Access issues in the city, we can't address that well. But certainly as far as the ease of financing infrastructure, that to me seems balanced the wrong way. Yes, sir.
I just had a question. You were talking about the bacterial contamination of so much of the waterways. And I was wondering whether it's practical to oxygenate those things in some way. There's a variety of relatively low-cost oxygenation. I just don't know enough about it. I don't know whether it would work.
I think that's a great idea, and others have brought that up in the past, but I'm not a water quality specialist, and those who are advised me that that is probably a non-starter.
There's always been a regulatory problem with that, and that the EPA does not smile upon treating the stream itself. It's been tried. There was an attempt.
Reserve with
air.
bacteria
Yeah.
from
Now, who knows? They may change. I'm not sure how much oxygenation would help the bacteria.
No, in some cases, you can make that worse because when you've got healthy oxygen supply, bacteria tend to feed on that and can become a higher level. So then you can have big die-offs, fish kills and stuff when you have that. So, I mean, if you go the other way, DO levels, dissolved oxygen levels around our region, except for about 4 or 5 streams, are really very good. We only have a few of them.
Yeah, I was really just asking a broader question of, yes, it would be nice to keep it out of the water, but once it's in the water, is there nothing you can really do about it?
We did have at a public meeting, one fellow who suggested that we just go ahead and chlorinate the streams. Take care of the bacteria problem.
Well, I actually heard recently there was a runoff study that suggested that some of the constituents of road runoff kill bacteria pretty well too. But I don't know that we want to go there exactly. But yeah, I think this whole idea of kind of looking at bacteria differently than we would, a regulated element of outflow is a good idea. The other thing some are bringing up is, this problem didn't happen yesterday. We've had chronic bacteria incidences in this dense urban area since we started measuring. And where is the epidemiological evidence that this is a big problem? Maybe slow-moving, hot, shallow, muddy streams are going to have more bacteria. So there's a lot of things going on in parallel. There's some groups looking at the standards. There's studies going on that question whether we can even physically attain the bacteria levels. DNA studies trying to find out whose fault it is. And so planning amid all these moving parts is a little bit daunting. But I think most people would agree on kind of what we've settled on in our focused approach, that doing what you can in those areas before all that other science is in probably makes sense.
In the follow the money scheme, and that's what I've been doing all morning, probably, there's not as much incentive or desire, I guess maybe is the right word, for fully incorporated cities, those with police and everything else, to incorporate unincorporated areas. You might, of course, some of those unincorporated areas don't want to pay city taxes, but the fact of the matter is the incorporated areas aren't that interested in getting them. They just as soon get their sales tax and just leave it be there. And that's been, I think, a trend for the last several years. We haven't seen any major incorporated areas trying to push toward incorporated.
And I don't think you will. For, again, another session's worth of reasons, but I think where that is going, frankly, is not this session, but some form of a county behaving more like a municipality in the future. I don't think we ever envisioned that we were going to be having millions of people living in dense urban unincorporated settings that have the same rules as Starr County or a very rural place. Thanks.
I want to thank you, Jeff. You might want to join me here, because I want for just a couple of minutes talk about this conference we went to in Albuquerque. It's called the New Partners for Smart Growth, and I think it's the 11th one, something like that. And I've gone to all but the very first one, and I have to say, it used to worry me that when people were talking about bad things, they would put Houston up on the screen. It used to be Atlanta, Houston, Phoenix, they put up on the screen as these horrible places. Then it got to be only Houston. and now they don't do that anymore, but still, the fact that there were 5 people from Houston at this 1,000-person conference, and that was the largest Houston contingent we've ever had, Jeff being the only one from a public agency of any sort. Yet from, small towns all over America and small cities and big cities, lots of people from planning departments and elected officials and county commissioners come to this thing because they are at least now 4 or 5 years ahead of us in thinking about this stuff. So that felt particularly strong to me this time. They were talking about things there that we can't even discuss yet in Houston. But I think the notion that the world, the country is really changing, and there was a lot, of course, of anticipation that the new president gets this stuff. There was a little film some of you may have seen of a guy at a rally with Obama and Joe Biden, and he's asking a question. He's got this book in his hand, and he says, I want to give you this, the most important book in the world. And Obama says, is it Jane Jacobs? Which everybody goes, wow, he's read Jane Jacobs, he's heard of her, and he thinks it's the most important book in the world. And then he does a 5-minute speech about cities that's actually overwhelming. He gets it, he understands how cities work and so forth. So you'll see it in the stimulus bill, and I think we'll see a new Office of Urban Policy coming up, and massive change. And with all the cities that I'm aware of having some sort of sustainability initiative that's trying to understand what that means. We may be growing fast, but we've got to do something to break through this notion that climate change is not real, that it's happening everywhere except in Houston, and we can't talk about it because it's not real. And then I want to say, to encourage you folks to read, at some point we'll put in our newsletter the links to all of those presentations and stuff about this conference, and to sort of pay attention to what's going on everywhere else somehow. Contradict everything I just said. But it's always depressing and revealing to go to this conference, or go to any of them, or APA or any of them. But I really think a moment has come where we've got to shake this lethargy off somehow. I mean, the notion that most of the county commissioners that run this place don't think climate change is real and shouldn't be talked about, where we know 83% of voters in Harris County think it is real and it's serious, means, of course, it means we're electing people that don't agree with us about anything. But somehow our activity, it feels to me, in trying to help make the place a better place to live, really has to ratchet up a lot. So there's nicer observations than that.
Well, yes, I'd be happy to. I'm always going to try to take the optimist's view of this, and I would just say that 5 people is better than 1, and actually, if you look at it, that's a what percent increase over time. So maybe that's the way I think we've observed changes around here. Is they tend to be, I don't know what kind of graph that is. There's a lot of feedback loops going on right now, all of them good, but the most important one, I think, to borrow from the presentation I saw David give, is well, when the paradigm changes, the other stuff is just the details. When we were very worried about congestion and finding new ways to finance roadways, we came up with some very creative programs that and again, I'm not judging that. I'm just saying when everybody agreed that congestion mobility was a big problem, and we've got to, well, not everybody, when elected leaders agreed that, it was amazing how much cooperation and creativity were put to bear to fast track big projects and whatnot. So if we can ever get that paradigm change, I think Harris County Flood Control is a really good example. That means that all of you are going to need to work with those staff and elected officials, and they just need to keep hearing this, because there are certainly groups who are advocating other positions on kind of a daily basis, and so they need to hear from you. And you know, just looking at kind of the tenure of elected officials and the tenure of key agency people and whatnot, you know, I'm part of the group myself. We're the aging baby boomers, and every chief engineer and prospective county judge candidate and others who are kind of coming up, you know, from a different generation are going to have been informed by different experiences. So this idea that we're tied forever to this notion that we can never talk about these things in Houston, I think that could actually change pretty fast.
If we make it change, I guess. So Jeff Anderson, who's the CEO of Smart Growth America, gave the last talk. It was pretty amusing. He was showing how great we were at technical stuff. We've got all these charts and graphs.
Hey, wait a minute.
Yeah, exactly. And over the years, we've come up with policies and programs and proposals and white papers, and you know, we know exactly how everything works, and we know exactly what to do to improve the quality of life everywhere. But it's not working. What's working, what will work, he says, is time to get really political. Which doesn't mean electioneering. It doesn't mean, you know, coming out for candidates or against candidates, but it does mean tremendous amounts of both voter education and candidate education. And there are a lot of groups that are now working on it. So I don't know what that's going to mean, but I mean, the whole thing is how do we get public officials to make decisions that actually improve our quality of life, whether they're, you know, whatever their reasons sometimes for not doing that are. So I think you're going to see a little difference in how everything works in the country. I mean, I guarantee you there are coalitions building up everywhere to do exactly what Jeff is talking about. I'm not sure, you know, this has never been a place where a kind of large collaboration works very well.
Here's that never again.
Works very well. It has never been a place like that, but I think it may be changing. And in fact, I know this Walkable Houston Coalition thing, which is evolving now. There is the Citizens Transportation Coalition, which has been very effective. If you don't know about that, CTC.
CTCHouston.org.
Houston.org has millions of forums and stuff on every topic. It's a great place to keep up, and it's a place to belong. It's an organization to belong to and get involved in. So, any other comments or questions before we move it up?
Please get some of our information on your way out, and if you'd like to sign up to be a citizen monitor, I'd love to have you.